Hello everyone. My name is Robert St. Thomas, and I'll be your host. Welcome to My Path of Asha, where we share real stories of those walking the path of Asha and carrying the light of Ahura Mazda into the world. So today we have us a very special guest named Colby Helms, who is from Elizabethtown, Kentucky. He's a fellow Ashavan, and someone is here to share his story that reflects the sacred fire burning within all of us. So, how are you doing today, Colby?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. Recording from Texas, and fortunately, at least my part of Texas, it's just light rain. So at this time,
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I hope everything's going out there. I know you're not affected with the flooding and going on, so
yes,
happy that you and your family are well.
thank you.
But excellent, absolutely. So yeah, let's yeah, get to know you a little better. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and where you were raised with, and what you were raised with spiritually, and how that shaped you as a person.
So as we joked before the interview, I always rep Kentucky. I always tell people that's where I was from. That's where I did most of my education. But I was born in Alabama. We were a military family. My dad's been in the military forever, and he actually just retired in Texas. That's how my entire family ended up here. But as anyone will know, anyone from the Bible Belt, the majority of Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, even heavily Baptist, heavily Protestant. And that was the majority of my upbringing. The spiritual milieu for me, I mean, my mom, I think, really just wanted to make sure I had my head on straight as a young man. Um, and so I was sort of the spiritual black sheep of the family. I was really into religion. I got invested very early. Every time we made a military move, it was always at my behest. I was like, let's find a church. Let's get rooted in. And a majority of what I was really fed spiritually was sort of your what they call low church, low Protestant, at least ecclesiastically Baptist theology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can relate to that as well, 'cause my mom is from actually a small town in Tennessee called Dixon, and that also
Okay.
is a very devout Protestant area. She grew up Church of God, and
Yeah.
then my grandfather, he was originally like a Southern Convention Baptist, so he was really, I mean, all about hard work, the Bible every day and night. There was no room for fantasy, no room for any nonsense. It was just Bible work and making sure you're giving
Yes.
yourself to the Lord. So I know what that's like, and that was passed on to me too. I grew up very religious and love God and never been an atheist, but it's something that was very embedded into my life growing up, and it's kind of like you. It also, in a way, allowed me to become distant from the faith, and
Yeah.
like you, I've had to tread on this new path, which gave me a much happiness and new purpose. All right,
Absolutely.
so let's see from that. Yeah, so when in that one moment in your life was it when you started questioning or searching for something deeper?
Yeah, so I mean, this sort of typified my entire spiritual experience. I know to the bane of my own parents. I mean, everywhere we would go, I mean, obviously being military, I'm going through my own progress as a young adult into teenage life. And I began having these like really pressing questions. And so it seemed like everywhere we landed, I would hit a next stage in my development and I would have larger and bigger questions to ask. Even
Mm,
to the point where I remember they invited a family friend who was a youth pastor at the time for a church we went to. Yeah, they invited him over just to entertain some of the questions I had as like a 14 to 16-year-old, just because my
mm,
parents were like, what what are these questions? I was the only like 16-year-old in the youth group, a 14-year-old in the youth group who's asking, like, what is my purpose in life? I want to
mm.
understand what am I supposed to be doing? Can you help me understand these dichotomies of like law and morality? I wanted to understand them as a young man. Um, so that typified a lot of my youth. So I was always asking questions, very interested in the intellectual side of faith. And of course, is what I found as I went on to like my undergraduate studies was that um, I have a lot of very intellectually savvy Christian friends, but I just found that Christianity just was not answering those deeper questions of faith that I really wanted. Um, as I went into college, my first introductory years were great. I had a great mentor as well. Turned me on to a lot of stuff in textual criticism as I began to study, say, like the New Testament, the historicity of
Mhm.
Jesus, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually I started an entire platform answering those questions for college campuses, and I would travel and do that for colleges or churches. But I think for me, the landmark time that had like the deep impression that maybe I was in the wrong area, like maybe I needed to look somewhere further, was right at the cusp of ending my undergraduate years, as I was, looking to go on to my graduate years. And I was actually introduced to the writings of the Stoics. Very late in my education, I started reading some of the, firsthand original source material of, like, say, some of the Neoplatonic Stoics and Aristotelians, and seeing how comfortable they were unpacking some of these, like, really sophisticated ideas in their own way, and to challenge those in their own school of thought. And so that kind of gave me an intellectual safety net, where I felt comfortable sort of setting the ties loose and letting the boat kind of leave the docks from Christianity.
Mhm.
And the rest is really history, but probably the most pressing issue that would puzzle me forever until I would, eventually find Zoroastrianism was this issue, this tension within Christianity between forgiveness and justice. Like, where is the justice piece that was really missing in Christianity? And of course, as I
Mhm.
sailed that boat out, eventually Zoroastrianism would fulfill that for me.
Absolutely, and I relate to that a lot of ways, and I think that was also a turning point in my life too. When I first started to get into my college years at 19, like you, I grew up
Yeah.
with a lot of questions in the church about, like, why does God create evil? Like, especially when you read that in the book of Isaiah, was it 45:7? It's like God
Yeah.
creates light and darkness and calamity. Then you see the problem of evil elsewhere in life and through nature,
Mhm.
and you mentioned about forgiveness, and I've always wondered, yeah, why, how can a God forgive by the shedding of blood? Why is it that,
Yes.
no matter what you do in life, there can be no forgiveness on your part based on your good character and your good actions? And so that, like you, relates to me a lot, and I'm glad that we've had the same experience and the same awakening.
Yeah.
So let's see, with this next question of ours, how did you first come to Zoroastrianism?
So for me, it was a little different, at least from the conversations I've had with others. But it was mostly academic. When I left Kentucky and moved to Texas, I had had this sort of climactic. I mean, I've written about it, I've been interviewed on it, but there's just like this climactic moment in my life where I had a small following in Kentucky, and it kind of dwindled down as I was sort of getting away from the ministerial stuff I was doing. And I had this like coffee house scene with a friend where I was explaining to him all the problems I was running into philosophically, and I ultimately reduced it down to this sort of like Jonah-esque mentality of like the
Mhm.
God of disappointment. Like, I was just disappointed with the God that I was presented with, and how it seemed like I even had greater moral ideals than what was being presented to me. And so I moved to Texas with that sort of floating in limbo, and I began this like deep dive and looking for what I termed like this better God. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what I really was looking for as I was trying to spell it out. But I sort of dove into like academia, like academia.com, EBSCOhost. JSTOR was a huge one for me, JSTOR. It's just academic websites. You can go in and just dig into academic papers all day
Mhm.
long, to the point where it like drove my wife crazy. I mean, like, she was just like, how many more papers are you going to read today? And I would just be diving through. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm just looking for references, but she knew I was going to be there forever. And that's really where I was introduced to like people like Mary Boyce and Almut Hentz, looking at some of their academic literature. As I put it, in the past, I was introduced to sort of the wholesomeness of Ahura Mazda, seeing like this almost philosophically systematic God, but is also like perfectly just and good. It was
Mm.
almost as if the philosophers had been talking about a God forever that I had been, studying analytically. And Zarathustra just kind of comes through and has this experience where he's revealing who this God is. Very much the antithesis of what you see with Christianity, where you see this sort of bridging of the gap with philosophy in the Roman Empire, but it seemed at tension at times. You don't really see that tension with Zoroastrianism. So I was really turned on to it just from reading academic literature. And then from there, I kind of worked my way backwards into reading the Gathas and the greater corpus therein.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I really love that because that's what I think makes Zoroastrianism so unique, or for an individual to understand Zoroastrianism, it really takes the intellectual drive to really go forth and dig down and understand it. Because most people will
Yes.
hear about it, but then they might hear about some surface level things like, oh, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. But when you
Yeah.
actually dive down and really see what the religion is about, you really become so engrossed into wanting to know more. And then, like you mentioned about the Gathas and reading the greater corpus of the Avesta, you really learn about the nature of Ahura Mazda is, and you really see his nature is very benevolent. You don't see he
Yes.
creates evil. You don't see that he's wrathful. Even among the Yazatas or the Amish Spentas, you don't see competition. You don't see strife. You don't
Yes.
see spitefulness in their characters. And then when you see that nature reflected throughout his divine forces, you can't help but wonder, yeah, is this the God that we've been working for? A God that is truly just and moral, that stands by his character? And so, that also makes you want to dip deeper, and then that makes you realize, hey, maybe Zoroastrianism that was revealed through by Zarathustra is indeed, in fact, a God that is benevolent, universal, and for everyone. So,
Absolutely.
yep. So let's see. Well, the next question is, so what was about the faith that really spoke to you as an individual?
So initially at the time I was writing a lot of different like blogs and papers, doing a lot of recordings on YouTube about this theory of justice that I was sort of unpacking. And I had a lot of different people pointing me in a lot of different directions, but what I was finding was that that theory seemed to really find its like, I guess it's like a missing puzzle piece with Zoroastrianism. So it's like I had a small piece of something that I was unpacking intellectually, and then it just kind of fit perfectly within the Zoroastrian worldview. And so it's
Mhm,
sort of like a step ladder. It's like you connect that, and it's like, oh wow, these are these consistent connecting dots across an entire intellectual map that make more coherent sense of the ideals that I already intuitively had than my previous faith, which told me that, everything you essentially think or believe is wrong except for these tenets. Um,
mhm,
Beyond that, I was actually really interested in the ancient Near East. I was looking at some of, like, say, the Mesopotamian world, and seeing some of the like, connecting dots culturally between that and like sort of proto-ancient Zoroastrian religion.
mhm,
um, that was a huge interest for me, but probably the biggest was this concept of like cosmic dualism, this great divide between good and evil, virtue and vice. It seems so intuitively true to think that God would just have nothing to do whatsoever with evil, suffering, death, sickness, and so on and so forth. And that deeply appealed to me. I mean, in college, as I kind of moved away from Christianity and looked more deeply into the philosophers of the Greco-Roman world, probably the most fulfilling was Stoicism. But even
mhm,
with Stoicism, you run into these grandiose issues of it's not monistic necessarily. It's sort
mhm,
of corporealistic in this sense, but there really is one primary moving agent. And with this issue of one primary moving agent, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, you run into the same issues that Islam, Christianity, and pretty much any monistic school of thought or monotheistic school of thought runs into. Evil still lands at the doorstep of your God. And so this notion within Zarathustra and the Gathas where there's this great divide and you have to make a choice. This resonated with me. And I felt like a kinship with this man that I didn't really feel with any other religious figure in history, where he's saying you have to make a choice of how you'll act and what path you'll follow. What God are you going to serve? And I thought that that was just powerful.
absolutely. You know what? And that was beautifully said. And I think, when a person really becomes a Zoroastrian, they realize they have more purpose in life and that their actions and their choices can really redefine not only their livelihood, but the future. I've always
Yes.
said that the beauty about Zoroastrianism that we see this world, and a matter of fact, this whole existence like a continuum where everything you do in the here and now can shape and really defined, the future and the outcome of everything, as opposed to you believing that everything is just simply God's will. And as you mentioned
Yes.
with the other, monotheistic or Abrahamic monotheistic religions, they're all about, okay, it's everything's the will of God. God wills. I know in the Quran it says, Allah guides who He wills and miswills or
Yeah.
misguides. And so you see that you really have no control in those religions. You're just at the mercy of like a cosmic puppeteer,
Yeah.
and you really feel like there's no power within you. You're just here to merely exist, just hoping that you'll have salvation or something better for you in the end.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, this idea of divine determinism. I mean, obviously, I'm coming from a Reformed background, from the Christian faith. So, I mean, that was pretty prevalent. But yes, I mean, like the idea that your free will has not you not only aid God in defeating evil, like you're a catalyst in this as a human, but you have like real effects on reality, the people you talk to and influence. It definitely is not one of these religions that wants you to shy away and hide away, as in, like in a monastery. It definitely encourages you that the most pious acts are ones that are ones of virtue where you're going out and doing something to change the world for the better.
Yeah, beautifully said. That was excellent. Agree with that 100%. So now, what was or was there a particular teaching or prayer or verse that deeply moved you when you first got a hand, let's say, of the Gathas or the Greater Avesta by any chance?
Yeah, so when I first looked into it academically, I mean, theologically, the most potent for me, and again, I was just looking at this from the ideals of justice, and so I was really interested in like the late developments at the eschatology. So I was looking at, say, like the bridge of separation, this sort of consistency and this idea of judgment at the end of history, and then this reconciliation with God of all things and making all things um, perfect in the way that I was kind of understanding it and sort of the Greco-Roman philosophy or the school of philosophy, the way they sort of describe these things. But as far as the Gathas particularly, I believe it's Yasna 53. I don't have the reference in front of me, but the passages which talk so heavily about the sacredness of marriage.
Mhm.
I felt like I discovered Zoroastrianism at a really pivotal time in my life where um, it was right at the beginning or right before my wife and I decided to really start about planning a family. And
Hmm.
some of the greatest questions for me, moving forward was what was the ways I wanted to teach my sons. I have two young boys who are under the age of 5, and and my parents would probably vouch for this too. My parents watched me wrestle for 15 years trying to, to dissect, discern all these denominations, theological beliefs, and all these different moral statutes and everything with Christianity, just to be consumed by it. And I didn't want to give that to my kids. I wanted to give them some type of like intellectually fulfilling future in their spiritual lives. And so this idea within the Gathas that marriage is sacred, that procreation is a gift from God, and it's not just like a sacrament within say Christianity, but it's more than that. It's sort of the culmination of the moral life where
Yeah,
mom, dad, kids, you're really learning how to be morally astute in that little sphere. And if you can learn it there, it sort of branches out to the greater spheres, all these greater spheres of influence and of the social world. And so it has this sort of social connectedness. And so it's almost like marriage is a social responsibility. Not to put that on maybe some audience members who might be single, but uh, it definitely influenced me very deeply, and it made me feel extremely comfortable exposing that to my children. And I'm always just really moved by that. I mean, I love the concepts of like marriage and ethics and where does it fit in. But yeah, that was a heavy hitter for me.
oh, that's absolutely beautiful because that's what I think is lacking nowadays. So many people, especially in the secular modern world, most people
Yeah.
rather just cohabitate or just be in a relationship just for the sake of pleasure, but
Yeah.
not with commitment. But then you really see, Zoroaster and even his daughter when she was being married to Jamaspa, as we see in the Gathas.
Yes.
He not only did he even tell her to choose who you want to marry, but to build a strong family where you can continue on, not only a happy household, but the teachings. And so when you have a strong family with you, especially as a Zoroastrian, you can pass on these teachings to the next generation so that they can know Asha and we can have a world that knows Ushta. And so I'm actually very happy that, a song like that in the Gathas really resonated with you because I think that's something that more people need to be aware of that marriage is something that's important and it's not just something sacred but it's a vehicle that really drives, let's say, a more civil and happier society because if there's a happy house that a person comes from, they're going to radiate that happiness elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
think that marriage, child rearing, these are the building blocks. Again, I was influenced so deeply in college by the Greco-Roman philosophers. Again, it's just connecting the dots. It really is the building blocks of society, and there's this sort of notion within the Gathas of like spouses sort of competing in righteousness to try
absolutely.
to be the best they can be to each other. And it's just really awesome to see, and this is something I've talked about in the past, but to see sort of a teleological angle to marriage where it's sort of like this ethical force that God uses to sort of allow the good religion to prevail in this world, not only just through teaching your children, but it's sort of like in that sphere, that social sphere, you're all learning. As a dad, I learn every day. My wife learns every
Mhm.
day. My children learn every day, just new moral motifs. And now, and I'm a guy. I know it's different for my wife, but and I tell her these stories all the time. But it's like for men, sometimes it's very difficult to empathize, and especially sitting given my situation in my life, the privileges I've had in my life. Um, Now I look at other men, other women, and I see in them someone else's child. It's much easier for me to empathize now that I have children and to have a more, I think, coherent ethical system that isn't
Mm,
just some choppy analytical, like do this, don't do that, some abstracta, but it's actually something that's very concrete, very earthy, and very real.
absolutely. So I think that out of that, you really now have this responsibility, and you really see people like as children of God. Like you see your children and other children, and then you feel that inspiration to, want to continue that same love that you have for your children unto others. And I
Yeah,
think that's what, especially how we as people can really truly build empathy more, and we can have a better society like that.
I agree.
So, what changed in your life after embracing the Zoroastrian religion?
So I think for me, initially it was viewing evil differently. This is more of an abstract answer, but there's a reality to this. But I viewed evil differently when I go through like bouts of suffering. I have a very different mindset now, where instead of like you need to kind of buckle your head and endure the suffering because in some way this is meant for some sort of salvific theosis or maybe salvific like suffering the way Christ did. I oftentimes see it as sort of a foreign entity altogether. Like suffering and evil are not goods, not necessarily something to adopt, but from that, um, it's the guilt. Most people talk about leaving Christianity and embracing a new faith, particularly with Zoroastrianism, though. This notion of guilt. I always joke that in my teenage life, everyone knew me. I was always trim and proper, did everything right. I always made sure because I just had this overriding guilty conscience, and so I would feel guilty about things I didn't do, things I thought about doing and would never do. And it's because of the relationship I had, I think, to the divine. I mean, I literally viewed God very differently than I do now. And it's almost as if I'm able to actually function. So I can go about life and not feel guilty about things I would have never even thought of doing, and actually go do something to change the world so that it actually can be better.
Absolutely. Wow, that was beautifully said. Excellent. And I think that's what I've learned too is that in life, you try to go through, trying to be the better self of your very being. But then
Yeah.
with our Christian background, I was very much very conscious about everything that I did. I didn't want to curse, I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to smoke, I didn't want to
Yeah.
fornicate. I was, plus with my mom's Southern Baptist upbringing, it was it was very much imposed on me. So I was really trying to be as religious and be as close to Christ as possible. But then, like you said, I really felt like everything I did was going to cost me something, even though the blood
Yeah.
of Christ was on me. But I always felt like something was going to, punish me if I didn't do this. And now that, me and you have found this new faith, we really feel that it's like, no, well, you're free from original sin, and every action you do that is good
Yeah.
means something. That's being in service to Mazda, and Mazda loves you. He won't condemn you. He All he cares about is you just choosing the right path and living for righteousness for the sake of righteousness alone. And I think that's a beautiful thing. You feel so free and liberated. You don't feel like there's this cosmic tyrant over you watching every little step and making sure that if you don't follow his guidelines, or you're going to be in eternal hell or any eternal banishment. So I really think it's very liberating. And so to our next question, so how do you live out the teachings of Zoroastrianism or Asha in your daily life?
So I think here for me it's allowed me to build a foundation of principles. Whereas before, I think a lot of my religious upbringing, it you hear of like armchair theologians. And I felt like I was surrounded in it. I mean, I started doing Christian apologetics at a time well before YouTube had sort of picked that up and ran with it. And so a lot of the faith for me was analytical. I mean, is all in like my head. I mean, I'm just thinking about it all day long. And what I found, as I was sort of leaving the faith altogether, was that it's not really uncommon. I mean, a majority of people in Kentucky, some of them even would just go to seminary, get super educated on theology, and never go into a church for the rest of their life. And it's like, well, why? What was the point? And for them, it's just some sort of contemplative exercise. But for me, it's actually allowed me to become so comfortable, I think, in my own like skin, become comfortable with my intellectual beliefs. And in some sense, it's so simple. I mean, it's super complex. There's layers of answers you could search for, layers of tradition and history, but it's also extremely simple. And despite not giving a list of apodictic commands, very much like, which is debated very heavily in the Bible, like which one's my following, it gives you these principles to guide your life by. And it's been a lot easier to navigate, I feel. And also, I mean, even without giving like these apodictic commands, it also seems like it gives some very solid direction with the moral character and expression of Zarathustra. And so, I mean, I've already brought this up, but really, it was one of the things that really drove me to be encouraged to start a family, to have kids, to see marriage the way I see it,
Hmm.
rather than say like within Christianity, marriage is it's considered a sacrament within the Roman Catholic Church. I don't want to get too heavy here, but at least in the New Testament, it's considered only an option for those who are more spiritually weak. Marriage is
Hmm.
oftentimes for those who are like, okay, you can't remain single, and so you should pursue it for your own weakness' sake. But it can still be used to, purge you of sin and things like that, and reach theosis in a different type of way. But with the Zoroastrianism, I saw it, radically different. It is something to aspire to. Beyond that, though, I think that it really helped me with like discerning what good is, like really focusing in on not some arbitrary definition of good, but really defining good in a species specific way. Good is some type of like well-being that it reaches and permeates to all facets of creation, not just to myself, but to my neighbor, not just to my neighbor, but to the environment. It's all encompassing. And so, as you mentioned before, this idea of liberation, it really does liberate. It liberates for one to want to go out and live a very fruitful life. And by fruitful, I mean like a
Hmm.
life that is really, permeated with the good.
Absolutely. And I think that's, yeah, was once again beautifully said because I think when people really have true liberty in their life and they have a purpose, knowing that they can make a change and they can see life through a sense of being free from chains, they really feel the inspiration to be involved with the world more. And when
Yeah.
you're more inspired to be involved with the world, you feel like you can do things you never thought you can do before. And I mean that you feel like you want to be that better person to your neighbor. You want to make a difference. And because I will admit, I know you probably felt it too a long time ago. I always felt that, hey, God has to intervene if he wants. It's his will. It's not in our say. Only thing we can do is gain salvation and just hope things will get better.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like I'm pretty sure too when you've always had Christmas celebrations, didn't it always feel better to give than receive? And I think as a Zoroastrian,
Yeah.
you really feel that it's in your duty to give, and you feel so good after giving.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's as I've joked with a friend, it's almost like every action you do is supported. It's like you have Ahura Mazda as like this great friend. He's an
Mm,
ally in this great struggle, and he wants to see you're good. And I mean, like other religions can talk about that, but at the same time, I mean, I've got really close friends who'll tell me when they pray, they're terrified to pray for anything specifically because they know it could just be used as a test to make them
mm,
suffer, to allow them to go
mm.
through some form of like social reform to prepare them for heaven. That sounds awful, but I know what that life is like. I mean, I joke, and I used to joke. I mean, like it as a kid, and it literally you can progress this through my entire life. As a kid, I mean, like I would be praying, like out of fear of things. It's just constantly out of fear of something, and it's just a completely different worldview. I mean, that's why I'm so grateful that I had to go through like 2 years of wrestling with this to figure it out. But it's definitely not one of those things you can just and then think that way.
Oh,
But it really is. It's like a form of liberation. It's the way I've seen it is like a Ahura Mazda is like liberating you. He's enlightening you and liberating you from the path of Druge, and I really see it that way.
yeah, beautifully said. So to our next question, so what does the concept of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds mean to you, and how would that, or how would you explain that to another person who hears those three simple tenets?
Yeah, so I always try to draw a dichotomy. I mean, reaching out to Westerners like myself can be rather difficult, but oftentimes I will make connections to Judeo-Christian values. Um, and so where I would start is by saying that, at least on the intellectual side, that when we say good thoughts, good words, good deeds, now we're talking about species-specific activities. So activities that are conducive to the proper functioning of that particular thing. And in this case, it would be humans, right? So I feel like in the case of Zoroastrianism, it gives you this teleological worldview where it's gearing you towards something. And in this case, there are, sort of microcosms within the macrocosm, but the macrocosm is really the perfecting, the making good of all of reality. And so that's a huge scale thing, and you've been called as a human to be a part of that project with God and to effectively combat evil wherever it might be. And so that's the macro. The micro here, for good thoughts, good words, good deeds, is asking yourself in all of those moments, not what list of commands do I need to keep, but what is a species appropriate action in these moments, right? And so, again, a little heady, a little bit of familiarity with, like, say, Aristotle. He talks a lot about sort of contextual ethics, ethics that make sense in that moment. And so, and I
Mhm.
try to explain this because I teach high school. Oftentimes we'll start out the year and I'll provide them sort of like a list of rules to follow. But as we progress along, and so my freshmen become sophomores, my sophomores become juniors, my juniors become seniors, they'll notice I'm not giving a list of rules anymore. I don't really feel like they need it. There are certain principles that guide them that sometimes are just about the thing. They're not something they can really describe. And so I think that that's the beauty of Zoroastrianism. It gives you this sort of guiding principle of good thoughts, good words, good deeds, which all sort of taper down. You think well, you act well. Um, but on the back end of that, I'm trying to remember the second half of that question. You said, how do I define them? And what was the second half of that
Oh
question?
yeah. Oh, so how? Yeah. So how would you define that to, let's say, somebody else? But then again, I
Yes.
think you gave an excellent, demonstration right there. So
Yeah,
that
so I
was.
mean, it really is like to explain to someone. Most people in the West will really latch onto this too. I mean, it's this notion of like, okay, well, this command that I'm given, I'll say like a divine command theory of ethics. How do I apply this? It's sort of deontological. How do I apply this in a really tricky ethical situation? I always think of like Immanuel Kant and the axe murderer at his door. It's like Immanuel
Mhm.
Kant's solution, because he thought you could never lie, was that you had to tell him, where your family was. You can't lie to the
Mhm.
axe murderer. Uh, and so I always use those examples because I feel like in our culture we really do wrestle as Westerners with the Bible, trying to discern it, trying to discern where our place is in that grand narrative, and then really trying to figure out how do we act. And for most people I talk to, it's always, I'll just kind of figure it out as I go along. And I'm like, well, what if we just took that, right, and then apply some general principles of direction? And I think
Mhm.
that that's what Zoroastrianism does really, really well. I'm of the personal opinion that as one tries to follow the path of Asha, that Ahura Mazda aids and guides, as well as the Amesha Spenta, the Yazada. And so I feel like it becomes a lot easier. But yeah, I just feel like there's this sort of paved path, but it's not paved in apodictic commands.
Yeah. No, that was excellent, absolutely excellent. And I think that's really the most defining thing about Zoroastrianism because everybody wants all these prescriptions. And I think the
Yeah.
fact is that as you mentioned, if you have these principles that are already in there, they already represent like the Amish Pentas. They represent truth, righteousness, serenity, good dominion,
Yes.
immortality, wholeness. And when you observe or yet you feel those into your very soul, it's like when you're going through life and you're willing to make situations through your choice, you can always know that those influences will be there, as you mentioned, it's principle to guide you to make the
Yes.
right decisions in those every given moments. And I've always said that in Zoroastrianism, our faith is like a living fire, where it's like, the fire never burns the same. It's always shaping differently, and it's always
Yes.
like giving illumination. And I think that all those principles really reflect to that original source of that cosmic fire, that we know as Asha, but it all gives you that principle to be guided by. And like you said, with your children at your school, you're able to just instill them those principles, and as the year goes on, they already know what's
Yeah.
good and what's bad as opposed to just, oh,
Following
I'm
the rules blindly.
yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
very intellectually malleable, and I think that that's a hallmark of strength. I mean, again, for anyone who's interested in ethics, I mean, it's the strength of virtue ethics up against divine command theory. At the end of the day, I mean, there's a reason why most of the philosophers went that direction. So, I mean, virtue ethics is extremely more applicable to day-to-day life, and it certainly calls for more moral reform on the person themselves rather than following. It would be akin to you're flying a plane and you have to pull out the manual every time you go to fly it. I imagine everyone on that flight is terrified. Whereas like a seasoned pilot, they're just of the quality of person that they could fly without doing that.
Absolutely beautifully stated. I mean, that was a perfect metaphor. So, to our next question, we got a few more left. So, what would you say to someone who is curious about Zoroastrianism, but they might feel they're unsure if they belong in the faith?
So I would start by saying that any god worth their merit, worth their salt, is not gatekept. I would say that any god who is just, is concerned with equity and equality, would be welcoming to every single person. And so the first place I typically go for people who ask something like that, because that is a very common one, is good. Is the good only accessible to certain persons? No one's going to say that, or at least I've never met a single person who would say acting good, being good, doing the good is only unique to a couple of different persons, right? Depending on who they are, right? It's accessible to all, and if good's accessible to all, well, then worshiping a good God, worshiping the right God is accessible to all. I'd also follow that up with a little bit of history. I mean, like Zoroastrianism is radically diverse all throughout history. I've been a huge fan of reading, about the Sogdians and the Kushan
Mhm.
Empire. I love reading all these radically diverse traditions of Zoroastrianism and how they express themselves. But I'd oftentimes just tell people that any closed offness you might feel from Zoroastrianism, it probably just came from a really obscure Google search, and I wouldn't trust that. Anything that's related to, say, like Orientalist scholars, uh, reinterpreting, some of the Zoroastrian faith in light of like Western Christianity.
Mhm.
Martin Hogg, I can't pronounce his
Oh,
German
yep,
last name,
yeah, that's
but
him.
really redefining the intellectual sphere of Zoroastrianism in his time. Definitely did a number on, say, the Zoroastrian history as it concerns, say, like ethnic Parsi groups. Um, and I try to get people past some of that intellectual garbage that we just got to move aside. Like that's just holding people up. And so oftentimes that's usually my approach. It's more so like an approach spiritually. Like, think about this rationally for a moment. Do you really feel like if God was good, he'd cut anyone off? And then moving past that to say, look at this more intellectually and practically. Zarathustra had to propose this idea, and then he had to propose it to someone else, and then they had to get on board with it. It's like, what is
Mhm.
that? It's like, well, they are converting.
Yep,
And so,
yep.
that's how this faith was born, and that's how this faith will thrive in the modern day. So get on board.
Absolutely, that's it. I mean, that's the way it's gonna continue on, and how everybody's gonna know the truth. If you gatekeep for too long, hey, the world will continue to remain in darkness, and we'll be just like how we were probably, God,
Yeah.
it's 5, 6 years, 7 years ago. So, yeah, that was beautifully said. So now, if we can get these last two down, if you could say one thing to Zarathustra right now, what would it be?
What conditioner does he use? I'm kidding, kidding. No. So I've thought about this one for a while, and for me, I think it would be more questions of philosophical intent. I really would just like to pick his brain. Um, I mean, so if you view Zarathustra the way, like, say, ancient philosophers did, so many of them wanted to, like, sort of throw their intellectual schools at the feet of Zarathustra and say, like, well, he trained this teacher, and that teacher trained this teacher, and that teacher was our teacher. It's like, so there's just like connecting throughout history to say, like, he's this OG philosopher. And so I would love to just kind of walk him through, like, say, just a day of metaphysics or a day of ethics. I would love to just see what he would say about, say, some contemporary issues or things like that. But I think if I were to get down to the nitty gritty, I would probably prefer, like, sort of an interpersonal guide. Like, what do you think about these matters? What would you say about the situation? What direction would you take? Sort of like a spiritual mentor.
Mhm.
Um, and probably the biggest one, I've always just sort of wondered this one, speculated. Um, what was his experience like? I want to know, like, would he define it just as, say, like intellectual assent? He had, like, sort of this very high convoluted, like, ivory tower type thought process, and he just arrived at some of these beliefs and just analytically spelled them out. That's not uncommon. I mean, there's a lot of religious milieu surrounding Pythagoras, and I mean, he did something very similar.
Hmm.
Um, or was it something really profound? I think that that would be really interesting to see the sort of like spiritual bridge between the intellectual and the spiritual. I mean, clearly something's happening there. And I would just love to hear him sort of spell out what his experience looked like. That would be something to really sit down for.
Absolutely. I think like you were saying, picking his brain out, kind of like, how in his very Gathas, he was always questioning Mazda. I believe it was through
Yes,
Yasna 43. It was just question after question. And I
I
think like
love that.
you, yeah, and I think and I remember I think it was you who said it before that I think the best way to gain the truth is through questioning as opposed
Yeah,
to
ask. The Socratic method that he uses, even with questioning God, I love that. And so I'm not saying that Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, I'm not saying these are not faiths that you can't come forward and ask tough questions. But certainly, at least in the West, Christianity,
Mhm.
particularly Protestantism, has built a milieu around not asking questions. So much so that we had to have an entire cultural sweep of apologetics to address the huge like exodus from churches from young people our age, millennials. And it's
Mhm.
like, but that's not what you really get with Zoroastrianism. I mean, even amongst the communities now, there's this real push to make your own choices and to really dive in and research this yourself. And I just feel like Zarathustra is a quintessential philosopher of asking questions and wanting to know more. I think that really what sets him apart from, say, like a Socrates for me is the particular angle and the ends that he achieved. I just
Mhm.
agree with them so much more so than say like what Plato is gonna. Even though Plato looked
Exactly.
extremely close, but yeah, I think that Zarathustra is a philosopher who invites questions.
Yep, absolutely. That was excellently said. So, to our final question. So, what are your thoughts on Zoroastrianism and its relevance to our modern society and the future of humankind?
Yeah, so this has been the big question for myself and plenty of my peers, especially those who are interested or have already converted to Zoroastrianism. Here's what I would say. I would say that the West. I mean, I live in Texas, so I see the some of the best and the worst of all the craziness. But the West is desperate. It is hungry for spiritual fulfillment, and I mean, Christianity has been rooted here forever. I once said, I think maybe 2-ish years ago that Christendom, effectively had been dead, and now we're just kind of waiting to see from the corpse what flower garden would produce on top of that. And when you hear those here in like North America, hear people in the United States talk about where they lean. Like when you hear somebody talk about their religious beliefs, most people have not even read the Bible,
Yep,
but they will tell you something about God that sounds radically like the Zoroastrian perspective and like the
absolutely.
antithesis of Christianity. And so sometimes I'll just try to bring this out of them. But what I would say is that the West is hungry for something. And I mean, we're even seeing it in some parts of the Middle East as well. It seems like Zoroastrianism is just kind of pocketing up in certain areas where people
Oh
are
yeah.
seeking liberation from these Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Islam, whichever one it be. And I think that Zoroastrianism offers that intellectual fulfillment that so many, not just millennials, but even some of the Gen Z students that I see, it offers them the intellectual fulfillment without all the intellectual baggage. Um, like I said, I oftentimes hear people spell out what their general religious beliefs are. And all I can think to myself is, well, have you considered looking elsewhere? I mean, like the culture, I get the culture here in the West is like, well, Christianity is sort of the only thing available.
Hmm.
But it's not. It absolutely isn't. And I think that once Zoroastrianism is presented as a palatable option in the intellectual sphere within these social contexts, wherever it might be, people latch onto it. I mean, it really does defend itself. I mean, there's very little need. I mean, even though there are apologetic corpuses out there for Zoroastrianism, there's very little need for it. It's one of those faiths where you just explain it and people are like, something like this exists this whole time. That's how I felt when I first was
Okay.
introduced to it. I was like, you're telling me this has been here this whole time?
Well, yeah, man. Like for me, how I found it was through just liking Persian culture, and I have some
Yeah,
relatives who happen to be Iranian. But just being in proximity to that culture, I've just been able to finally find it and really have the inspiration to find more books on it, know the right authors,
yeah,
and beautiful, like how you're saying, like, and I do really agree with that. I think that more than ever. people are hungry or hungry for the truth. And I think it's that call again of Asha in their hearts, because everybody has the Farvashi in their very soul, and nobody is separate from the original source. So I
Yeah.
think that there's more exposure, and there's people like us, very intellectually savvy people, especially people like you. I do think that more people will be, inspired more to really gravitate to this faith, because it's so freeing. Its ethics are just self-evident, and the fact that it encourages your own freedom of thought and gives you overall spiritual liberation. I think it's like the ultimate religion for the 21st century.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's the effort of a lot of persons like myself and yourself is um, to be an advocate for people. I mean, especially here in the West. I mean, I hate to use like terms like missionary, but in some sense, I mean that is really, I think, the call for a lot of new Zoroastrians who are coming into this. We're being brought into a world that it's not that they disagree with it. Most people have no idea what it is. And
Mm-mm.
so I hate to say it's the best kept secret, given the fact that its history
Absolutely.
is quite replete. I mean, it's a huge history, one of the largest faiths of history, and definitely one of the longest trending religions in history. And it's
Oh
like, but
yeah.
for most people, I mean, you might see a passing glance to it in like a world religions course and like maybe your undergrad. I don't even think I got it in then. And so the effort's on us. I mean, to go out and to really reach these people. And again, I mean, I know there's like a real stigma within some Zoroastrian communities to make like a sort of apologetic argument for the faith, but many times you really don't have to do that. I mean, you're just, again, it is kind of like liberating people. You're just offering them, I'll put it this way. This is the way I put it in the past. I am merely the beggar who knows where the bread's at, and I'm just telling other beggars where the bread's at. That's it. I'm literally just telling them where to go eat.
Absolutely. I'm the same exact way, on my Instagram. I don't claim to be an influencer or anybody big. I just said, hey, I'm a Zarathustra. I live by good thoughts, good words, good deeds. I read the Gathas. If you're
Yes.
interested, yep, here you go. If you need a copy, I got you.
Yeah.
So, but you said that once again, everything you said has been beautiful, and
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. Your story is very inspiring, and really, I think this is going to totally draw more people. Seeing two intellectuals like here expressing our love for the faith and wanting to be a better light to this world, I really do think this is going to grow and be something greater. And I know Zarathustra himself will be proud.
I completely agree, and I really appreciate the opportunity, man. It's been excellent. Thank you for all the compliments. You've been a great host.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I know we're out of time now, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this episode, and I'm so thankful for you, Colby, to come on the show. And I know we will have many more, and stay tuned. And I wish you all radiant happiness, as we say, Ushtave. So you take care, Colby. We'll see you around, and Mazda be with you.
Thank you, sir.
You got it. Take care. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.